Thanks everyone else for joining us today. My name is Andrew Spencer, and today I'm going to be talking about the ladder of system thinking, an iterative approach to building systems for design. So you're probably familiar with concepts like a design system or processes. Let's see, here we go. Yep, processes like this, the double diamond method for design, where you're constantly making progress and there's great, clear communication between your team. But we know that oftentimes the reality looks a little bit different, looks a little bit more like this, right? So it's kind of messy, and if this is your reality, then you probably need to think a little bit more about the systems that you're using and or may not be using, and how those can be helping your team work more effectively. So why do we need systems in the first place? Well, they help with a variety of things, from team communication to building better UX and increasing your team productivity. So if you feel like any of these things are lacking for either you or your team, then maybe you need to do some thinking about the systems that you do or don't use. So it's kind of like designing how we design, right? So let's look at some examples of what happens when there's a lack of well thought out systems. So maybe something like this happens, where clearly there was some communication issues between two different groups here as they worked on this building. Or maybe you build a system and it works great for one application, but then once you apply it to other things, the system sort of breaks down and can even cause some problems that are rather dangerous here. Or maybe you create a system, but then it requires so many different workarounds that it ends up just rendering the whole system ineffective in the first place, and no one can really tell how to use the system that you made, and all that effort that you put in is just sort of wasted. So how do we avoid situations like this? Well, again, if you relate to having a lack of communication or inconsistent UI or design fatigue because you're solving the same problems over and over again, then it would probably be wise to think about the systems that you use. And so what does the industry say that we should do, right? Let's consult them. Well, they'd probably say just go and build a design system, right? That's sort of the ultimate tool for building great products and working super effectively together. But that sounds like a lot of work, and it definitely is. And no one just goes and builds these kind of things overnight. So I don't think that a design system is necessarily the best solution for every team. And I think the question that we should be asking is, how do we build effective systems, and more specifically for you and your team? So here at Sparkbox, what we like to do is iterate. We iterate in everything that we do. So let's start with kind of building a system for how we build systems in our organizations. So my system that I have here is what I'm calling the ladder of system thinking, and it looks a little bit like this. So there's 4 steps here, or 4 rungs in the ladder. Starting at the bottom here, we have chaos, moving to components, a pattern library, and then a design system. So this is sort of a framework to think about how we build systems. And you should probably be able to place yourself somewhere along this ladder. But let's break down each step in a little bit more detail to look at what those entail. So chaos. This is where most people start. Chaos is sort of the natural byproduct of ideation and experimentation. It's where your design file is super messy. You're just creating a bunch of ideas, getting them out there, whether on paper or most likely into pixels. And there's no real rules defined here. You're just exploring ideas. But this is not a bad thing. This isn't a bad place to be. I think it definitely has a place. It's very helpful early on in projects when you're exploring different solutions. You want to make sure you're exploring a wide variety of options before landing on a final solution. But it's important to note that documentation and organizing things doesn't really make a lot of sense at this point, because it would just break your flow, right? You want to be able to get a lot of ideas out and not spend time sort of documenting things that you're just going to end up throwing away. So problems can start to arise at this stage in the ladder when other people try to jump in and start helping you in your design work. So because everyone has sort of a different mental model and how they like to think about design, it's difficult for other people to just jump in and start adding value right away. It can be hard for other people to understand the decisions you made or how you're approaching the problem. And even you can open up a file from 2 weeks ago and forget why you made a certain decision, like making the buttons blue instead of green, for example. So this sort of step on the ladder is really best for ideation. It works pretty well for a single designer, but definitely can be causing problems once you expand to a larger team. So let's look at the next step on the ladder here. Components. So components is sort of the natural step out of chaos. It's where you're introducing documentation and organization to kind of organize all the decisions that you made during ideation. You can start defining things like text styles, colors, icons, and then you create components out of those base pieces. So once you build a nice navigation structure that you think works really well, you can document that and then turn it into a component. And I think the key here is to answer the why. Why did you use a hamburger icon for your navigation instead of the word menu? But as far as outcomes go, here it's a lot faster to make changes to your design work as you go, since you can create a component and then sort of copy and paste that everywhere else. And then if you needed to change it, you don't have to track down 20 unlinked instances of that component to update the design of it. And on the code side, engineers will be able to build your product or your site in terms of components as well. This is sort of the language that they use. So if you start designing in this way, it makes it a lot easier to kind of build a shared language of collaboration between your teams. So the big key here, the big takeaway at this point is documentation. And this is really good for working with 2 or more designers because they can share concepts and ideas between the 2 of them. So having all this documentation in place now will make it a lot easier to move to the next rung in the ladder, which is a design library. So if you're not familiar with this term, a design library is essentially a collection of components that you've sort of pulled out of a single file to make that available to a larger group. So your design tools like Figma and Sketch all support this functionality of removing components and then sharing it across an organization. And this is really where you're starting to help reduce decision fatigue by allowing your teams to decide something once and then move on to a new problem. For example, instead of having 5 different teams all trying to figure out what a modal should look like, you can have one team that defines a really good flexible solution, create a component, and then share that component out for everyone else to use. So you won't have to have 5 different teams trying to solve the same problem. And this allows your team to go off and solve bigger and probably more important problems over time. So the outcome here is an exponential increase in the benefits of components because you're now sharing it out of just a single project and onto the whole team. You're not just restrained by a single file. And this is really great for working on 2 or more projects or files at the same time. So at the top of the ladder, the final step here is the good old design system. So this is the real advantage here is now you're sharing communication outside of just the design team. So engineering, project managers, your marketing team even, everyone can benefit from the shared resource and documentation that you've written. So your design, your code, your documentation, all that stuff lives in one central hub and can be accessed by everyone. But to be done well, this really requires a lot of work, usually a fully dedicated team to be constantly maintaining it so it doesn't become outdated and losing value. And remember, this is like the top of the ladder. So we've climbed up all the way to get here. There's a lot of effort to get here. A lot of things can go wrong in the process, whether it's getting the resources in place to actually build a design system or trying to get other people to start using it. But the outcome here is definitely beneficial. The fact that everything is all combined into one place, code, documentation, design, you've kind of created an ultimate guidebook for how to build websites and projects in your organization. So a few takeaways and some things that we can learn from this method, some advantages here is number one, consistency. So as you go up the ladder from chaos all the way up to a design system, you're creating a shared language for collaboration. So now everyone's on the same page. You're improving the UX and the visual design by establishing patterns and then building on those over time. So with each rung of your consistency is now spread a little bit further out across your organization. So it starts with just a single project, and then eventually it expands to cover, sort of all of your product design teams, your designers, your engineers, etc. And it helps you start to think a little bit more holistically about the work that you're doing. But the further up the ladder you go, the larger you distribute that consistency across the organization. And eventually you get closer and closer to users as well, because you're getting closer and closer to influencing the design of the code, which your users are actually going to interact with. Because at the top of the ladder, right, we're pulling in engineers as a part of the conversation to make sure that what we design is actually turned into built components and everything looks consistent. So not only does consistency increase, but your team efficiency should also increase as well. So it helps you avoid making the same decisions over and over again as you move up the ladder. And just like consistency, as you go further and further up each rung, you're spreading out that efficiency to more and more people in your organization. Also, all that documentation that you wrote now helps to answer all the questions that people have about your design work. So instead of answering Slack or DMs all day, you can just point people to the documentation, because that should really be sort of the source of truth and where they can figure out the answers to their questions. So now you can use all the extra time that you gained to build better components, right? You can work on accessibility. You can create better animations. You can, as a UX person, validate larger design patterns and look at some of the bigger questions of your product. And I think it should also be noted that while it's great that consistency and efficiency are increasing here, the level of effort also increases. So it's a lot easier to go from chaos to components than it is to go from a pattern library all the way up to a design system. And as the scope of your work increases, you're going higher up the ladder. It's more time consuming, right? So as we mentioned earlier, each rung is more beneficial for different types of groups. And for example, like an individual designer isn't going to be able to build a full design system, and it probably just wouldn't be worth their effort since they're the only one that's going to be using it. But if you're in a large organization with a lot of different products, it's definitely going to be beneficial. So it's in that sort of vein, I think it's important to note that you don't have to climb all the way up the whole ladder. I think you need to stop at the point where it makes sense for your team and just focus on improving what you have. Oftentimes, really, that's the most valuable use of your time here. There's always going to be ways that you can make the system that you have now a little bit better and a little bit more useful. So just figure out what questions people are still asking, what documentation is missing, and try to improve the system that you have. So while related to effort, their team size is also going to increase as you go up. The value that you're giving out for that whole team will increase as well. So consider the size of your team and how many products you're working on when thinking about whether to move up the ladder, like from components to a pattern library. Again, not everyone needs to go all the way to the top here. You don't want to waste your effort building a more complicated system than is actually necessary. But by approaching things incrementally, you can make sure that you stop at the level where things are just good enough to deliver the value that you need for your team and help people start working more effectively. So one more takeaway here, in a little bit of a different vein here, your value is going to be created incrementally over time. So a benefit of looking at building systems like this through the lens of a ladder here is you can see how each step or rung in the ladder is delivering value as you go. So often when faced with issues like a miscommunication or a need for more documentation, teams will just say, okay, let's go build a design system because that's going to solve all those problems. But unfortunately, that effort can often just sort of fizzle out, because it's like takes so much work to get up and running before you actually deliver any value to your team. So looking at building a design system through the ladder approach here helps you see how you can create value along the way, because even like the level of chaos here at the bottom has value, since ideation is obviously super important as we're exploring different ideas. So this is like a sort of sneaky way to go about building a design system over time with the resources that you already have, instead of asking for a whole lot of additional resources to just go and build a design system from the ground up. This also makes it a lot easier to get executive support for your design system, since you can show how you're adding value over time. And I think Ben Callahan, president of Sparkbox, illustrates this concept really well in this diagram, where he shows productivity as a team with a design system and productivity of a team without a design system. So here, with a design system, there's this initial dip in the team productivity as people are working on setting up the system. All the effort is effort going towards building the system, not building actual products or websites. So the ladder approach here helps visualize how you can break up that dip in productivity over time into like a bunch of small dips rather than one large dip before you deliver any actual value. So by creating value in the short term, you're helping to motivate the team that's working on it and getting that support that you need to keep moving up the ladder if that's the right thing for you and your team. So that's it. I hope that you can identify where you and your team fit on this ladder and think a little bit about whether you should focus on improving what you have or maybe moving on to the next step. So what you should do here is decide whether it's important to improve what you have or do this sort of like mental calculation where you weigh the advantages of the next rung against the effort that it takes to get there. I think you'll find that oftentimes the best approach is just to improve what you have, because a little bit of documentation goes quite a long way. So that's it. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks again for checking out this video. If you want to learn more about how we're building a better web, visit us at sparkbox.com.